Beneath the sands of North Africa lies a memory the world has tried to forget. Before the rise of foreign empires, before temples were shattered and tongues silenced, there was Amexem, the ancient name for a land of stars, stone, and sacred power. In this vast northern stretch of Africa, long before the borders we know today, divine forces walked with humanity. The gods of North Amexem were not myths imported from Greece or Rome. They were born of African soil, of fire and sun, of desert winds and Nile floods. They ruled not only over temples but over time itself. And yet today, most do not know their names. Who were these gods, these forgotten powers of ancient Africa? What stories did the priests of Kemet whisper under starlit skies? What sacred symbols did Berber tribes carve into cave walls long before the pyramids rose? What cosmic knowledge did the desert mystics of the Sahara pass down through dream and drum? These are the questions that echo across the ruins and sand dunes, questions silenced by conquest, erased by foreign creeds, and buried beneath centuries of colonization. But the desert remembers. The stones still speak, and the gods, though veiled in silence, have never truly vanished. Today, when people speak of North Africa, they speak of Arab empires, Islamic scholars, Roman ruins. They rarely speak of the divine systems that existed long before, the indigenous spiritual forces that shaped civilizations, cosmologies, and kingship. But to understand Africa, we must begin with her gods, not those brought from across seas, but those who rose with the sun, danced in the fire, and lived in the bones of the land. This is a journey into a forgotten world, a journey to remember the gods of North Amexem, from the all-seeing eye of Ra to the warrior spirit of Gurzil, from the goddess Tanit of the Berbers to the ancestral sky beings of the ancient Sahara. We will uncover the divine blueprint that once guided an entire continent. These were not symbols, they were power, they were presence, and they are waiting, buried in stone, etched in memory, and carried in blood, for those bold enough to remember. In the land we now call Egypt, the people of Kemet once walked with gods. Their temples weren't just places of worship. They were portals, cosmic machines that connected heaven and earth. The deities of Kemet weren't distant creators watching from above. They were forces of nature and consciousness, interwoven into every aspect of daily life. They structured the universe. They explained the stars, the floods, the seasons, and the soul. To live in Kemet was to live in constant conversation with divinity, through architecture, ritual, and the unbreakable order called Ma'at. At the center of it all was Ra, the sun god, the great eye who traveled across the sky by day and through the underworld by night. He was both energy and presence, the light that made vision and life possible. Ra was the beating heart of creation, rising each morning to battle the serpent of chaos, Apep, in a cycle that never ended. Every dawn was proof of victory. His journey was more than symbolic. It was real, lived through ceremony and myth. Kings aligned themselves with Ra, not only to rule but to reflect his divine authority, calling themselves sons of the sun and designing pyramids to mirror the solar rays he cast upon the desert. But no force in Kemet existed alone. Alongside Ra stood gods of equal power and complexity. Isis, or Aset, was the divine mother, healer, and protector, a goddess of magic who knew the true names of the gods and could bend reality to her will. Her love for her husband Osiris became the core of Kemet's most enduring myth, the story of death and resurrection. Osiris, lord of the underworld, had once ruled the earth in peace until he was betrayed and murdered by his brother Set, the god of storms, chaos, and foreign lands. Set was not a devil, but a necessary force, the embodiment of disorder and trial, the force that tested the harmony of the world. Isis searched the earth for Osiris's scattered body, reassembled him with her divine knowledge, and conceived their son Horus, who would grow to challenge Set and reclaim the throne. This myth wasn't just a story of gods. It was the story of kingship, of cosmic justice, and the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Osiris became the god of the dead, not in decay, but in transformation. He ruled the Duat, the underworld, not as a tormentor, but as a judge, welcoming the righteous and weighing their hearts against the feather of Ma'at. Ma'at was more than a concept. She was a goddess, a principle, and a divine law. She represented truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order. Pharaohs were not merely political leaders, they were guardians of Ma'at. Every law, every ritual, every grain measured in the granary was judged against her standard. To live outside of Ma'at was to invite Isfet, chaos, the same force that threatened the universe each night when Apep slithered toward Ra's solar boat. The ancient Egyptians didn't simply obey laws. They lived in rhythm with the divine structure of the cosmos. When a person died, their heart was placed on a scale against Ma'at's feather. If it was lighter, they passed into the field of reeds, a paradise of eternal life. If heavier, their soul was devoured by Ammit, the devourer of the dead. This belief guided how people lived. Every act mattered. In the city of Memphis, another creator god ruled, Ptah, the god of craftsmen, architects, and builders. Ptah didn't create with hands. He created with thought and word. According to the Memphite theology, the world began when Ptah imagined it in his heart and spoke it into being. Through his speech, the gods emerged. Through his voice, the world took shape. Ptah represented the divine power of articulation, that to name a thing was to give it form and function. He was the patron of artists and thinkers, of blacksmiths and scribes, of those who made with both mind and matter. His temples were filled with sacred blueprints, rituals of precision, and the geometry of eternity. Together, these gods and goddesses formed an interdependent system, one where creation, destruction, love, conflict, truth, and deception were not opposites but necessary forces in a balanced whole. The divine family of Kemet was complex, dynamic, and multi-layered. Even lesser-known deities played vital roles. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, measured time and recorded judgment. Hathor, goddess of joy and music, nourished the soul. Anubis, jackal-headed guide of the dead, prepared bodies for the journey beyond. No god was insignificant. No ritual was without purpose. Temples were not churches. They were the homes of gods, constructed with astronomical precision, aligned with solstices and stars. Priests maintained these spaces not just to honor the gods, but to sustain the universe itself. Daily offerings of bread, incense, water, and prayer weren't superstition. They were spiritual technology, rituals that kept the cosmic machinery in motion. To neglect the gods was to invite the breakdown of reality. That is how seriously the people of Kemet viewed their role in the divine order. What makes Kemetic spirituality so profound is its wholeness. It didn't divide the spiritual and material. It did not ask people to reject the world, but to perfect their place in it. Life was a test, not of blind belief, but of alignment. One's work, speech, thoughts, and even silence were part of the great equation of Ma'at. Death was not an end. It was a return, a journey toward judgment and hopefully to rebirth, not in heaven, but in the endless fields of divine memory. And though the gods of Kemet have been pushed into museum cases and academic texts, their power remains. Their images carved in stone still radiate meaning. Their names still hold vibration. Their myths still resonate with the eternal truths of life, transformation, and order. They were not just the gods of an ancient empire. They were, and still are, the blueprint of divine consciousness, written in sun, sand, and stone. Long before the Mediterranean empires expanded and foreign banners flew over North Africa, the lands of the Berber and Amazigh peoples were steeped in sacred tradition. Across the mountains, deserts, and oases of present-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, a rich tapestry of indigenous gods and goddesses shaped the spiritual worldview of the people. These were not imported deities, but powers rooted in the stones of the Atlas Mountains, the harsh winds of the Sahara, and the ancient rhythms of pastoral life. Though much of their memory has been fragmented by conquest and colonization, the divine world of the Amazigh remains an essential part of the spiritual story of North Amexem. Among the most revered goddesses of this region was Tanit, the great mother and celestial queen of Carthage. Though often remembered through the lens of Phoenician influence, Tanit's presence extended far beyond urban centers. She was a protector of fertility, life, and the moon, often depicted with outstretched arms, a crescent above her head, and a sacred triangle or trapezoid below, symbolizing the womb and divine power. In her temples, offerings of oil, milk, and incense were made to ensure the prosperity of crops, families, and entire communities. Her sacred symbol, the Tanit sign, can still be found carved into stones and amulets, a lasting echo of her presence. But Tanit was not alone. In the Libyan desert, the Berber warrior god Gurzil stood as a force of resistance and divine rage. Gurzil was not a god of passive worship. He was a protector of tribes, invoked before battle, carried into combat in the form of a bull, a powerful symbol of virility, strength, and fearlessness. According to Roman accounts, Gurzil's statue was borne into war by his devotees, a physical embodiment of divine intervention on the battlefield. He was believed to be the son of Amun, linking him to a broader North African cosmology that transcended tribal lines. In times of conflict, Gurzil did not promise peace. He promised vengeance, survival, and ancestral power unleashed. Amun, though often associated with ancient Egypt, also held deep significance in Berber spirituality, particularly in the region of Siwa Oasis, a place that straddled cultural boundaries between Kemet and Amazigh lands. The oracle of Amun at Siwa was so respected that even Alexander the Great journeyed there, hoping to receive divine validation of his rule. To the Amazigh people, Amun was not a foreign god, but a sky father, a source of hidden knowledge and desert wind. His worship blended local traditions with wider African currents, showing the fluid and interconnected nature of divine belief across ancient North Africa. Beyond named deities, the Amazigh world was filled with spirit forces tied to place and lineage. Mountain gods who guarded passes, water spirits who lived in wells and springs, ancestral forces who dwelled in sacred groves and rocks marked with ancient symbols. The Atlas Mountains, a range that cuts across North Africa like the spine of a sleeping giant, were seen as a holy realm, a place where gods walked, storms were born, and wisdom could be sought in silence. Oral traditions spoke of sky gods and earth mothers, of spirits that could bless or curse depending on how they were approached. There was no sharp boundary between nature and deity. The land itself was alive with spiritual presence. These spiritual systems were deeply integrated into the everyday life of Amazigh communities. Rituals were performed at seasonal markers, during harvests, births, marriages, and times of danger. Healing was both physical and spiritual, guided by Temagrawin, women who carried medicinal and mystical knowledge passed down through generations. Sacred chants, protective tattoos, and carved talismans were tools for aligning with divine forces, warding off misfortune and maintaining balance in a world that could be as harsh as it was beautiful. With the arrival of Rome and later Christianity and Islam, much of this ancient spiritual world was driven underground or absorbed into dominant religions. Temples were destroyed, gods were renamed or dismissed, and oral traditions faded from public life. Yet in remote villages and whispered songs, the old powers never completely disappeared. Even today, Tanit's symbol reappears in jewelry. Gurzil's legend lives in stories of resistance, and Amun's sanctuary at Siwa continues to draw seekers of wisdom. The Amazigh identity itself, unbroken by millennia of conquest, stands as a spiritual testament. It carries with it not only a culture, but the memory of gods who shaped the wind, guarded the stars, and gave voice to the desert. In the face of silence and suppression, the gods of the Berber and Amazigh people endure, not as relics, but as ancestors. To remember them is to remember that the divine once walked freely in the lands of North Amexem before the names were changed and the stories rewritten. They remind us that power does not always wear a crown or sit on a throne. Sometimes it wears a bull's head, a crescent moon, or rides the breath of the mountains, watching, waiting, ready to return in the hearts of those who remember. Long before recorded history etched names onto papyrus or temples were carved in stone, the great Sahara Desert held secrets of its own. What many see today as a barren ocean of sand was once a land of life, teeming with lakes, rivers, forests, and people. During the African humid period, over 7,000 years ago, the Sahara was green, and in its vast open spaces, early humans built a profound relationship with the land, the sky, and the spirits they believed moved between both. Here, in the heart of what we now call the desert, some of Africa's oldest spiritual systems took shape. Systems not written in books or clay, but painted onto stone, whispered through lineage, and lived through ritual. These early peoples did not worship in cathedrals or pyramids. Their temples were the sky, their altar the earth itself. The clearest record of their spiritual world survives in the form of Saharan cave art. Thousands of images sprawled across the rock shelters of the Tassili Niger region in present-day Algeria and the Caucasus Mountains of Libya. These are no mere drawings. They are sacred texts in stone. Painted in ochre, white, and charcoal, they depict cattle, antelope, dancers, hunters, and enigmatic figures with animal heads, elongated limbs, or star-like halos. Scholars have long debated their meaning, but many agree. These were ritual images capturing ceremonies, deities, and spiritual transformations. Some figures appear to float, surrounded by dots and lines that suggest trance or possession. Others wear horned headdresses or bear wings, suggesting that these beings were not human, or were humans touched by the divine. These early Saharan peoples practiced what scholars call animism, but to them, the world was simply alive. Spirits lived in the sky, in rain clouds, in lightning, and in stars. The ancestors, once departed, did not leave. They moved into the landscape, into memory, into presence. They were called upon during rites of passage, births, healings, and funerals. Offerings were made not to appease, but to maintain connection. A smooth rock might hold the spirit of a forefather. A well might be guarded by a divine being. The sky itself was a source of messages, cycles, and sacred timing. There was likely no strict pantheon in these prehistoric Saharan systems. not a list of gods with temples and thrones, but rather a cosmic ecology of spiritual forces. Some beings were honored as sky gods, luminous presences associated with thunder, rain, or the sun. The sun was especially revered, not just for its warmth, but as the ever-present eye watching over the earth. Some cave figures appear with solar discs or rays, arms outstretched as if in prayer or invocation. The moon, too, was tracked, its cycles governing fertility, harvest, and ritual. The night sky was not empty. It was filled with the breath of spirits, ancestors, and divine guides. These beliefs laid the foundations for future cosmologies across Africa, including in Egypt, where later gods like Ra and Nut would mirror these ancient celestial archetypes. The mystics of the desert were not priests in the later sense, but likely shamanic figures, individuals chosen through dreams, trance states, or lineage to bridge the gap between human and spirit. Cave paintings suggest the presence of dance rituals, possibly involving drumming, chanting, and hallucinogenic plants. These were not mere performances. They were sacred technology, methods for entering altered states where the divine could be seen, heard, and embodied. The body itself was an instrument of communication. To dance was to speak to the gods. To paint was to preserve their voices. The reverence for ancestors in Saharan spirituality cannot be overstated. The dead were not lost. They became part of the moral and metaphysical framework of life. Elders carried oral histories that stretched back generations, linking every individual to a sacred chain of memory. Burial sites were marked with care, often near cave shelters, ensuring that the dead remained close to the living. Ancestors advised, protected, and corrected. Illness was sometimes seen as the result of a neglected spirit. Healing came not only through herbs, but through ritual, invoking the name, feeding the presence, remembering the forgotten. Though time and desertification eventually scattered these cultures, their spiritual frameworks did not disappear. They migrated with people, south into the Sahel and west towards the Atlantic, blending into the traditions of the Dogon, Tuareg, and Fulani, whose cosmologies still reflect early Saharan beliefs. Even among the modern Berber and Tuareg communities, ancient desert mysticism survives in song, in protective symbols drawn in sand, in stories told by firelight beneath an open sky. Western archaeology once dismissed these ancient desert people as primitive, their art as decoration. But today, we know better. These were the first astronomers of Africa, the first cosmologists, the first to gaze at the stars and feel their souls respond. Their gods were not anthropomorphic rulers, but elemental beings: fire, rain, ancestor, breath. Their temples needed no walls because their world had no separation between spirit and matter. They were not forgotten, they were simply waiting, painted in silence, carved in stone, carried in wind, for us to remember them again. The gods of North Amexem did not vanish in a single night. They were not conquered with one sword, nor silenced by a single doctrine. Their erasure came slowly, like a candle burning low, flickering against the winds of empire, conquest, and conversion. From the rise of foreign powers to the imposition of new spiritual orders, the once vibrant divine systems of North Africa were pushed from the temple into the shadows, from memory into silence. But silence is not absence, and even in their repression, these gods remained, hidden in ruins, encoded in ritual, whispered by those who refused to forget. The first great wave of erasure began with the Roman conquest. As Rome expanded its grip across North Africa, the temples of Kemet were repurposed, looted, or shut down. The Roman state religion, with its pantheon of Jupiter and Mars, imposed a new spiritual hierarchy on the African landscape. Some African deities were absorbed into the Roman system. Tanit, for example, was blended with Juno or Venus. But this syncretism often diluted her indigenous essence. The Romans respected power, and where they saw spiritual might, they sought to control or neutralize it. The oracles of Siwa were no longer visited by native mystics, but by emperors seeking divine legitimacy. The priesthoods of Egypt, once the guardians of Maat, were replaced with bureaucrats of empire. As Rome embraced Christianity in the 4th century, the shift grew more forceful. Christian missionaries branded indigenous gods as demons, their temples as blasphemies, and their rituals as barbaric. Shrines were torn down, texts were burned, and sacred symbols were defaced. Statues of Isis, once revered as the Queen of Heaven, were reinterpreted through a Christian lens. Her image recast into the Virgin Mary. The old cosmologies were no longer seen as wisdom, but as sin. The African divinities, once central to spiritual life, were now enemies of the one true God. Conversion was not just encouraged, it was enforced. To retain one's traditional beliefs was to risk isolation, persecution, or worse. Then came Islamization, sweeping across North Africa in the 7th and 8th centuries. With it came the profound influence of Arabic culture, Islamic theology, and new social structures. Islam, unlike Roman paganism, did not tolerate multiple deities. The old gods were not reinterpreted, they were erased. The concept of Tawhid, the oneness of God, stood in direct opposition to the polytheistic and animist traditions of ancient Amexem. Sacred groves were declared haram. Ancestral rituals were condemned as shirk. The very memory of local divinities became dangerous, a liability that could provoke accusations of heresy or idolatry. And yet, even in this climate of suppression, spiritual survival endured. The gods adapted. Their names were no longer spoken aloud, but their symbols remained etched in stone, worn as jewelry or drawn discreetly on walls. In remote villages, rituals persisted under new names. The beating of drums, the pouring of libations, the veneration of ancestors. These did not disappear. They became cultural rather than religious, hiding in plain sight. Some figures, like Sidi Abd al-Rahman, revered in parts of the Maghreb, may have originated from older divine archetypes repurposed under Islamic frameworks. In women's songs, in healing chants, in the secret knowledge of midwives and elders, fragments of the divine past endured. The loss of temples and formal priesthoods did not end the spiritual lineages of North Africa. They transformed them. Knowledge once passed in public ceremony began to move through families, through intuition, through art. Oral tradition became the last stronghold of the gods. In the desert, in the mountains, in the hearts of storytellers, the memory remained, dimmed but not destroyed. It waited. Now, in the 21st century, we live in a time of awakening. Across the African diaspora and the continent itself, people are reclaiming the sacred stories that colonization tried to bury. They are asking who they were before conquest, before conversion, before the silence. They are discovering that the gods were never truly lost, only hidden, only patient. The gods of North Amexem were never truly gone. They were never myths, never distant fantasies carved into forgotten stone. They were breath, they were rhythm, they were memory walking barefoot across the sands of time. Even as conquest crushed temples and conquest silenced priests, the spirit of these gods endured. They lived in the lines of cave art and in the stars traced by desert mystics. They moved through the chants of mothers and the dreams of children. They hid in the silence, waiting, not for salvation, but for remembrance. To remember these gods is to remember who we were, before the world told us who we could be. It is to remember that Africa did not borrow divinity from anyone. She birthed it. She shaped it in stone and sky, in water and womb. She knew the language of the stars before Rome had roads, before Europe had kings. The gods of Kemet, the spirits of the Sahara, the warrior deities of the Berber, the ancestral powers that walked with the first people. They were not local. They were cosmic. They held the blueprint of life, death, and return. And they are still here. You can hear them in the thunder. You can see them in the quiet defiance of a desert wind. You can feel them in the heartbeat of those who still speak their names in secret. They do not ask for worship. They ask to be remembered, because remembrance is a sacred act. It is rebellion against spiritual amnesia. It is the reclamation of a birthright buried beneath conquest and creed. This journey was never just about ancient history. It was about spiritual recovery. It was about stepping back into a story that did not begin with slavery or colonization or conversion. It began with creation, with divinity, with the gods of Amexem walking among their people, offering not fear but knowledge, not separation but connection. And even now, when their temples have crumbled and their priests are long buried, their presence lingers. You don't need to look far. You only need to listen. If this video blessed you, here's how you can bless someone else. Like the video so others can find it. Share it with someone who needs this. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching. Stay bold, stay rooted, and never stop remembering who you are. The ancestors are watching, and the gods are still listening.